Okay. So I want to start with the topic. Now that I gave you that introduction, I want to start with something we spoke about, or I should say I put in my text today regarding today's class. And that is to have self-recognition. Hasidic philosophy has a lot of axioms. It's a lot of most important foundations that allow for the success of the Hasidic way of life and Hasidic philosophy. And one of the most important in Hasidic philosophy, and it's probably also as well in other philosophies as well, and that is self-honesty. Just to preface with a story, or not a story, a statement that the Rebbe Maharash, the fourth Chabad Rebbe, he one time said, you cannot fool anybody, right? People in general are not fooled. I mean, you could fool people for a short period of time, but you can't fool anybody. God, you can't fool, right? God knows what's going on. Other people you can't fool because eventually the truth will come out. And so he says, what comes out, therefore, is the only person you're fooling is yourself. The only person you're fooling is yourself. And that is very common. We often are fooling ourselves. We may think we are at a different place than we really are. Sometimes we think we're greater than we really are. Sometimes we think we're less than we really are. And both of them are destructive and not helpful. One of the foundations of Hasidus is quoted by the Rebbe in the Hayom Yom, the daily lessons, and he writes like this. He says, the true path towards serving God, I'm adding the words to serving God, is you need to know your essence with a good recognition, with a true recognition of your weaknesses and your strengths. When you know your weaknesses, you fix them in serving God, and you do not rely on size alone. And so that is really where Hasidic philosophy comes. You know, it's interesting. I didn't think about this before the class, but I'm also reading a book now by Rabbi Dr. Abraham J. Twersky. He has a great book out there called "It's not a fault, it's a character trait." He has a lot of books, good books, but this one's called "It's Not a Fault, It's a Character Trait." And it's a very interesting book, but the part that I was just reading the other day was really on this idea, is that you don't want I'm sure you know this already, but the object of life is not to be someone else, it's to be yourself. And being yourself doesn't mean, like today's people think, is you give into your weaknesses. It's like here, recognizing your weaknesses, recognizing your strengths, realizing what of your weaknesses you can overcome, what of your weaknesses you can't overcome, and how to lead your best life based on what you're given. Again, unlike some in today's society who think they're, because of their weaknesses, that means they're stuck and they just have to live with that weakness. No, but it's to recognize who you are, and most importantly, not trying to be someone else. That's really what it means to recognize your weaknesses, is that you should not try to be someone else. You should try to be your greatest person in your own strengths. And that will come to play. Why am I mentioning all of this? This will come to play in today's chapter, because today's chapter is really in the discussion of this chapter, it's talking specifically to a Beinoni, but the message is to all of us. And part of the chapter is telling us that, or I should say, talking directly to Beinoni, it's telling the Beinoni, do not fool yourself, as we discussed in the last chapter. Do not fool yourself that you're a tzaddik. Do not fool yourself that you're righteous, fully, completely. And it basically tells the Beinoni how to look at themselves. And as I've mentioned in other classes, we may read these chapters about the Beinoni, and we may get very disheartened, because we may think that we have to be the Beinoni. We have to, never ever sin. And I think what these chapters about the Beinoni is really telling us is, like I keep saying, the Tanya beyond chapter 14 15 actually does not talk about the Beinoni. It doesn't really mention the Beinoni anymore, to my recollection. Because the discussion about the tzaddik, the righteous person, the rasha, the wicked person, and the Beinoni is really just to tell you and map for you what is your highest potential, what is your fullest potential. And the first step we have to realize is that we are never going to be a tzaddik. And that's the important recognition for us, that we're never going to be a tzaddik. The pinnacle of our life is to control our actions, even when our heart doesn't agree with it, even when our heart does not agree with the actions that we should be doing. And number two is slowly to change our characteristics, although we will never fully change it. That's really our goal. That's really what all these chapters about the Beinoni. But the discussion of the Beinoni is surrounded by a lot of text that he has to prove his points. And so some people may get lost, and some people may think, oh, the Tanya is telling me that if I'm not a Beinoni, I'm lost. And you should just know that tradition is always very important. The tradition that always run around with the Tanya is that we tell ourselves, we're for sure not a tzaddik. And halavai, I wish we could be a Beinoni. It's halavai a Beinoni, which means I'll probably never fully be a Beinoni, but halavai a Beinoni. And it's not a depressing thought. It's just a recognition. Again, it's acceptance. That's really the most important thing. That's really self-honesty. That's what I said. Today's about self-honesty. It's about acceptance. Acceptance of where you are, acceptance of who you are, and where you can get to. All that being said, all these discussions about the Beinoni are very much relevant to us, because even if I'm never going to be someone who will never, ever sin, I have many moments where I do feel like a Beinoni, because inherently, me and the Beinoni are not that far apart. Me and the ultimate person is not that far apart. Why? Because the Beinoni also has urges. I have urges, the Beinoni has urges. The difference is that the Beinoni never gives in, and I sometimes give in. But I can learn from the Beinoni and what we study about the Beinoni to learn how to not give in at certain times. And so that's why these are all very important. All right. So the first discussion is going to dovetail off of a question we started in chapter 1. In chapter 1, we read a statement from the Talmud that says, Beinonim zev v'zeh shoftan. That Beinonim, a Beinoni, an in-between person, both their good and their bad impulses are their internal judges. And we had a question. We said, if the person is being ruled by both their good and evil inclination, how could they be a Beinoni? We went on to prove that a Beinoni could never sin. So how can we say at the same time that a Beinoni is ruled by their good and evil judges? And the answer that we're going to answer here is, you have to read the words carefully. It says a Beinoni is judged. A Beinoni, both the animal soul and the godly soul are judging. So the Alter Rebbe focuses on the word judging, right? If you go to a court case and you have judges sitting in the court, just because a judge says his opinion doesn't mean it's accepted, right? If you have one judge says this, two judges say that, the two judges is accepted. So the same thing he says is the Beinoni is someone who inside of them, they have the war, they have the godly soul as the judge says this is what we should do. The animal soul says this is what we should do. But ultimately, the Beinoni is the one who always chooses the godly judge. So that's an interesting thing. He's focusing on the words. If it would have been that the Beinoni is controlled, it would have said, Beinoni, this one and that one, rule him. But it doesn't say rule him. They're judges. Just as judges can give rulings, the Beinoni can get different rulings. Let's take a look here at the text. So again, this is the textual proofs to the Alter Rebbe's thesis that a Beinoni is someone who never sins, but yet has an inner struggle. And that's very much relatable to us. Yes, we sometimes do sin, so we're not the full Beinoni, but we can identify with the struggle and learn from how he deals with the struggle. So let's take a look here. We'll be on page 152. It says like this. With this insight into the nature of the Beinoni from chapter 12, we can understand the teaching. We can understand the teaching of our sages of blessed memory cited in chapter 1. In the case of in-betweeners, both good and bad impulses are their internal judges of what they do or do not do, etc. Meaning that they are guided by the Yetzer Tov, impulse to good, and the Yetzer Hara, impulse to evil. Guided. The Talmud cites proof from the verse, for the verse states, he, God, stands at the right hand of the poor person to save him from those that guide his soul. Okay, so this is, it says in Psalms, that God stands to the right of the poor person to save him from those who guide his soul. So shofet, judge, can also mean a guide. It's an interesting translation. Anyway, so let's read it. Let's read it here, but I'm not going to get too stuck in a textual proofs because it's not the goal that you want out of the study of Tanya. In chapter 12, we discussed how the Beinoni, while torn inside between his two impulses, never allows his Yetzer Hara to control his behavior for one moment. With this in mind, we can now appreciate the Talmud's precise choice of the wording that the Beinoni has two internal judges, the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara. The Talmud did not say the Beinoni is ruled by both impulses, which would imply that the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, would actually have some real control over his behavior. God forbid. But merely the Yetzer Hara judges the Beinoni internally, voicing its opinion. That opinion, however, is never listened to by the Beinoni in practice. So again, what I said to begin with, the Beinoni has the two judges. They all voice their opinions. The Beinoni just never listens to the bad opinion. Now, we also have two opinions in us. And we're going to discuss today, how do you know which opinion you're listening to as well? But let us continue. For as we have seen in chapters 11 and 12, whenever the Yetzer Hara has any control and dominions over the body, the small city, right? Remember, we discussed this like a war. Our body is the ground for the war, and the godly soul and animal soul are fighting over control over the body. And we're saying here, if the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, gains any control over your small city, your body, even for a short while, the person is classified as a Rush at that time and not a Beinoni. So it's an interesting thing we discussed in chapter 1. I don't know if you remember. The moment we sin, we are classified as wicked. At that moment. Why? Because at that moment, I'm disconnected from God. Now, when you go to heaven, right? When you go to heaven, you get judged for your good deeds and bad deeds. They might say, well, you made only one bad deed and you did many good deeds, so you'll get to heaven. That doesn't mean that the Tanya, which judges righteous and evil based on our internal state, cannot call us wicked at the moment we sin. At the moment you're sinning, that means that your body is overcome by the evil inclination. And at that moment, we cannot call you righteous. We cannot even call you an in-betweener. You have given over control of your body to something that is against and the antithesis of God. Again, does that change the way I look at you as a person? No, but these are the inner hard truths we have to accept upon ourselves. We like to excuse our sins. I excuse my sins as well all the time. Tanya, though, gives us self-honesty. It tells us, every time you sin, no matter how large or small, that is inherently giving a part of and control of your body to something which is against and the antithesis of God. Now, you may say, well, I'm not ready to do everything, right? And you might be correct, and even a rabbi might tell you, listen, here's the ultimate goal, take it one step at a time. But you have to know what's good and what's not good. Just as, let's take health, right? If you have a lot of unhealthy habits, we have to tell you the truth. These habits and these foods are going to kill you, or whatever, going to make you unhealthy in a close period of time. But that, and that's the truth. You have to recognize the truth. Then what are you going to do about it? Okay, so take it slowly. You're not going to, you're not become shredded and fit overnight. You're not going to suddenly exercise and eat the healthiest food in the world overnight. You're going to take it one step at a time. But you have to have a recognition of the truth. There's no way around it. We cannot just ignore the truth just because it's inconvenient, right? So again, this is all important as we're talking about self-honesty. I believe these are such important thoughts and ideas. To be honest with ourselves is, and again, I'm not judging you. You all, I'm not any more righteous than you are. I have my failings and times that I fail, and most important to recognize that any moment that you give over dominion or control of your body to evil inclination, you are Russia. You're wicked to the extent that what does wicked mean? What does wicked mean? How do we, we think wicked means an evil person. In Judaism, wicked means, simply put, that you are allowing something that is against God in your life. Let's continue. Now, God is very demanding, I have to tell you. All right, let's continue. Rather, in the case of the Beinoni, the Yetzer Hara is merely, like, for example, a single magistrate or judge on a panel who offers his legal opinion, which, however, might not become the final legal ruling, being that there's another magistrate or judge who offers a dissenting opinion, and a third judge is required to resolve between them. and the law follows the words of the reconciliatory view. All right, so we have stated the godly soul, the Beinoni has two opinions, and but just because he has two opinions doesn't mean he has to follow them. I'm wondering whether to give an introduction to this next part. I think I will. Okay. Now, we said in the previous chapter that the mind rules over the heart. The mind rules over the heart, and therefore, overruling the animal soul, you would think should be easy. Right? That's kind of how we described it earlier. Now, I was studying this morning. The way to understand the next section of Tanya, I actually found a couple different explanations. I'm going to pick one, and one that's hopefully meaningful for all of us over here. That's the most important thing. But it was just an interesting thing, because basically, the previous chapter, chapter 12, made it seem simple. If you just will enough, your brain will rule over your heart, and your godly soul will rule over your animal soul, and that's all there is to it. Like we saw in the video. Let your brain control it, your brain take charge, and then you rule over your heart. I did mention some caveats last time to that, and one of the caveats was that we are not always fully decided. Our minds are not always made up. What the truth is, or what we should be doing, is not always so clear. Let me put it in other words. As long as it's a fight between the mind and the heart, it's very easy. I'll give an example. Someone gets you very upset and you want to hit them, but you're a civilized person. There's no way in your mind you are actually thinking, I'm going to actually hit them, right? So yes, your heart says, go hit that person. Maybe a feeling in your heart, but your mind is going to shut it down right away, and you'll have very easy time with your mind controlling the heart, right? That's easy, right? So as long as the desires of the animalistic soul are relegated and still stuck in the heart, then we employ the term, the mind rules over the heart, and life is very easy. The moment, though, the desires and the wills of the animal soul have gotten to the point where they've come up to the brain, then, as we're going to show in a moment, it becomes a little more difficult, because it's not just a battle of the heart, the mind over the heart. Now it's a battle of the mind over the mind. The battles that we have of the mind over the mind are always the hardest that we have in our lives. So again, let me back up. There are certain things in our lives that are just, we know we don't want to do them. They don't even enter our mind. We blast them out of our mind. But then there are things where it's not so clear, and the evil desires enter our mind to an extent. For example, that person that got you angry, you might blast out of your mind hitting them, but you may feel that getting back at them in other ways will be appropriate. And now you have a battle in your mind, because one part of your mind says, Torah says, don't do revenge. On the other hand, another part of your mind is already has great ideas. I'm telling you, well, don't allow yourself to be a carpet. Don't allow yourself people to walk over you. It's time that you showed some strength, and it's really for that person's good. You're going to show them how they need to, grow up and take responsibility, and all different explanations you have in your mind. And so the explanation that I saw here on Tanya is the same thing happens by the Beinoni. At least by the Beinoni, it says like this. By the Beinoni, now this may not be our experience, but I'll give it to you how it applies by the Beinoni and how it applies by us. The Beinoni has a similar concept. It says when it comes to complete sins, the Beinoni is like us when it comes to hitting someone, right? The Beinoni never contemplates doing a real sin. Okay, so the Beinoni never thinks of eating not kosher. The Beinoni never thinks of saying lashon hara. Beinoni never, but sins within the realm of permissible items. Okay, maybe wasting a little bit too much time. Basically, lower level sins that it may not recognize as sins. That's where there becomes a battle in the mind. How it applies by the Beinoni is not important. Okay, I mean, it is important to understand the Tanya. So basically, the explanation is in chapter 12, where it spoke about the mind ruling over the heart, it was talking about things that are completely forbidden, the Beinoni would never think of doing. And chapter 13 is talking about things which would enter his mind a little bit more to think of doing, where it becomes more of a struggle. But the same thing we have to apply to ourselves. As I said, it's important to understand this in ourselves. We each have our own red lines. The actions, just one second, Mushki, I think the baby's crying. The actions that are beyond our red line never really enter our mind to do. Okay, each in our own lives, we have our red lines, right? For some people, it may be cheeseburgers. For some people, it may be shrimp. For some people, it may be any non-kosher. For some people, it may be pastel, chavisel. For some people, it may be lashon hara. Everybody has their own red lines. And typically what you'll find is the things that are beyond your red line won't even enter your mind to do. It's an easy battle that you have between the mind and the heart. The heart may still want to do something, but it never really enters your mind to even do it. So you can easily overcome such a thing. However, we all have different areas of our life where there's a struggle in our mind, where our mind is not so made up. And the question is, in that case, how do we overcome? When, as we just presented, when there's two judges, okay, I said, right, if there's three judges, but where did I get a third judge from? There's only two judges, right? There's a godly soul and animal soul. There's only two judges. How is it that when I have a godly soul and animal soul, and they're both fighting in my brain, who's the third judge? Who's going to win? Who's going to be the, right? Who's going to be the one that's going to make the seesaw, weigh it out? And the Alter Rebbe's answer is going to be is that if you allow it, your godly soul can tap in to its connection with God, and God will be that third judge and will allow you to win. So again, if you allow your godly soul to shine, then the godly soul will connect with God, and God will be that third judge and allow you, even in those very difficult situations where you yourself have doubts. But as long as you know what the truth is and what the right thing is, your godly soul will shine with the God inside of it, and it will win the battle. So let's read that here in Tanya, these words. So we just finished off saying that there were two judges, and remember how I presented this. We're talking about in scenarios where your mind itself, again, not things that are just relegated to the heart, times where it's come into your mind, you're not sure which way to go. You have two great options, right? Either to do nothing or to teach the guy a lesson. So it's like this. In a similar way, the Yetzer Hara first states its opinion to follow a certain path of self-gratification in the heart's left chamber. So let's say, for example, to go after that person. And from the heart, it rises to the brain to be contemplated and is immediately opposed by the second judge, which is the divine soul in the brain, which then spreads to the heart's right side in the place where the Yetzer Tov rests. So you have two opinions. So you got the animal soul, which started in the heart, went up to the brain. If the godly soul, which started in the brain, went down to the heart. But who's going to win? It's one-on-one. As we have learned in chapter 9, the divine soul has two main locations: the body, the brain, and the heart side. After rejecting a self-gratifying thought in the mind, the divine soul's in the heart's right side then rejects it emotionally as something undesirable. How is the dispute resolved? So now he's going to say, but how do you actually manage that the godly soul, which is one, overcomes the animal soul, which is one? And he says like this: the law follows the words of the third reconciliatory view, right? If you have three judges, you follow two judges. This third judge being none other than God, the Blessed Holy One, who comes immediately to assist the Yetzer Tov. As our sages of blessed memory taught, if the Blessed Holy One did not assist him, he could not overcome the Yetzer Hara. This represents a new insight. In chapter 12, we were led to believe that the Beinoni achieved self-mastery over his behavior purely through his own merits. Here we learn he only succeeds in the battle through divine assistance. What is the divine assistance, and why did the Beinoni of chapter 12 not seem to need it? Now, I gave you one explanation. Here he gives a different explanation. But did I go to the right page? 153. So ignore the question because I already gave you the answer. This assistance is a glimmer of God's light shining upon the divine soul. But here's going to say the question again. But why does the divine soul need a glimmer of God's light? Surely the soul itself is godly. So this is a separate question. This question is, what do I mean the godly soul has to tap into God? And then you have three, right? Then you have the animal soul, the godly soul, and God. the godly soul itself is godly. What does it mean to get to, on the good side, you need to have the godly soul connect to God. The godly soul is already God. He's going to explain. The notion of a divine soul is something of a paradox. On one hand, it is a soul, an autonomous spiritual entity which animates a human, and yet on the other hand, we say it is divine, literally a piece of God above. The divine soul then has a dual identity. It has the wrappings and functionality of a human soul, but unlike most creations, it can easily reconnect with its divine essence and inner godly flame. To explain what he's saying here. You have a godly soul, but the godly soul, as you see it, is you. That's you. So if it's you, it's separate from God. That's what he's saying. The godly soul is kind of a paradox, right? If it's really God, then how could it have any type of feeling of self? It should be subsumed within God. So the godly soul has this paradox, which on the one hand, it seems like a creation, which means it's separate from God. At the same time, it's a part of God. And what we mean by it, it's a part of God. It can easily reconnect with its divine essence and inner godly flame. In chapter 2, we described how the godly soul comes down to this world through a gestation period and becomes kind of separate, but at its core, it's still a part of God. And so therefore, when we mean the godly soul has the easiest time of anything else in this world to connect with its godly identity. Obviously, everything is created by God. There's just a measure of concealment. The godly soul, though, is the closest and has the easiest time reconnecting with its godly origins. I guess that's the best way I could say it. The assistance, which Tanya speaks here of here, is the divine soul's ability to get in touch with its true self, to stop for a moment being bound by the limitations of the soul, and to behave in accordance with its inner divine identity. And as he continues, with something we mentioned in the last chapter, once the godly soul connects with its divine identity, nothing can stop it. This assistance enables the divine soul to have advantage over and control over the stupidity of the fool, the Yetzer Hara, like the advantage of light over darkness, as mentioned above, like we said in chapter 12, the moment light shines, darkness disappears. Darkness is the absence of light. So when the godly essence of your soul shines, the decision becomes clear. Then he asks the question that I asked earlier. He asks, why do I even need this? Why can't just the godly soul rule over the animal soul? He gives one answer here. I gave a different answer that I wrote on the margins of the page over here. But this is the first section of chapter 13. And that was number 1. We spoke about self-honesty, although that's actually going to be the next discussion. I gave you that introduction of self-honesty. But number 2, we discussed a very important idea, which is that we have within ourselves a battle that goes on. And when the battle enters the brain, then it becomes very difficult to ascertain and it becomes more difficult to overcome. And so those items of our life which are within our red line will require more conscious connection with God. Let's put it that way. There are some things in your life that, I don't think Yom Kippur is a struggle for most people here. But some other days maybe are. Some other times maybe are. Everybody has their own areas of struggle. And we have to realize that the areas of our struggle in life, the way to overcome, sheer willpower will be difficult because you have one godly soul, one animal soul. It's one-on-one. So it's very difficult to overcome. And therefore, the best we could do is to connect with our godly soul, to allow our godly soul to shine. And that will help us overcome any ideas of the animalistic soul. There was a story I wanted to say. I'm trying to remember. There was a story I wanted to say. The story was it's not a story. It's from the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov says very interesting thing. Because we're talking about over here. Talking about where you're not sure which one is right. You have a godly soul and animal soul. You're not sure which path is right. That's when it becomes most difficult, and you have to tap into your godly. So the Baal Shem Tov takes us another step further. He bases it upon a verse from Moses. Torah in Parshat Jethro, Parshas Yisro, Torah in Parshas Yisro discusses how the Jews appointed, or with Yithro, with Jethro, they appointed judges who would judge the people, and only the very difficult things would only the very difficult things would be brought to Moshe. And I want to show you the verse over here because it's very interesting. And it says like this. It says in the verse, let me just show it to you. Here it says, where is it? Sorry, I'm just going to point to you the verse. Okay, anyways, the verse says like this. It says, V'hadavar asher yiksha mikem. Anything that is difficult to you, takrivun elai, you shall bring to me, ushemativ, and I will hear it. So the Baal Shem Tov says like this. Hadavar asher yiksha, when something is difficult, when you have a decision that's difficult, when you have in front of you a choice that you're not sure which one is the right path, mikem, the way to know the reason why you're not sure is because mikem, you have some self-interest. Mikem, anything that's difficult from you, meaning whenever you have a difficult decision, is coming from you. Meaning, what really boils down between the right decision and the wrong decision is our self-interest, our ego. We have to delve deeply when we have two options in front of us, and which one is coming from our self-interest and which one is coming from what God would want. Let's go back to my example that I've been giving you today about desiring to teach somebody a lesson. If you delve deeply into desiring to teach someone a lesson, you might convince yourself that you're doing that person a favor, and that person has to learn, and they need to be taught a lesson. And that's why you're getting back at them. But if you were to think a little bit, you would realize that really all you're doing is in self-interest. That person wronged you. They walked over you. They made you like a carpet. You want to get back at them. And so whenever we're faced with dilemmas, usually we can trace down why we're stuck with these dilemmas and figure out which one is the wrong one by figuring out which one is coming from us. And as the verse continues, Takrivun elai, if you want to fix it, bring it to me, meaning bring it to God. And God will give you the understanding of which way is correct. That is ultimately how it goes. I'll give another, if you want a crude example, okay? Father, have a little baby, right? Okay, the baby wakes up in the middle of the night, and now both spouses will explain why it's better the other one should wake up and take care of the baby, right? Right? Well, you know, you anyways have to get it to feed the baby, you might as well change the diaper. The other one says, well, I have to get it to feed the baby, so I need to sleep. Let me sleep for a few minutes, or you change the diaper. You know, so you can see this thing. So we recognize in all these cases that the excuses or the reasons everybody's going to come up with why the other person should wake up is all in self-interest. In our self-interest, we come up with lots of good ideas. You know, so ultimately, the ultimate way to get to the truth of what I should choose to do in my life is by removing my self-interest. And this comes back, by the way, to the beginning of the class. This is why I also started the class with being honest with ourselves. Just as we have to be honest with ourselves about who we are, we have to be honest with ourselves in the choices we make. That's why honesty is the foundation of Hasidic philosophy, and probably any philosophy, again, as I said, but Hasidic philosophy, you have to be honest with yourself. And so when you are in those choices that are, you know, within your red lines, and you're not sure which one is the godly choice, and it's not always clear because the animal soul will come to you with ideas. We have to always recognize where it's coming from. Another great example, let's say you wasted your whole day, and then suddenly you wake up at 9 o'clock at night. I really should study a little bit of Torah. And right as you decide to study Torah, another voice comes in your head. Yeah, but you really have to clean up the house. I mean, you didn't clean up the house all day either, right? And you have to think. You have to think. Which, I think probably the better answer would be, okay, so study for 15 minutes, then go clean up the house. The animal soul that wants to find suddenly, right? Why suddenly you want to clean up the house? The whole day you didn't want to clean up the house. Suddenly when you're starting to think of studying, suddenly you're going to clean up the house. Happens so often. Suddenly we get the most menschlich ideas. Menschlich. You know what menschlich is, right? Everybody knows what menschlich is, right? Suddenly we get the most menschlich ideas when we suddenly think of doing something godly, right? We didn't think of it the whole day, right? And it's really important ideas and good ideas, but why are you only thinking of it now? It's very difficult, but we have to remove our self-interest, and that will sometimes help us recognize and come to the understanding of where this opinion is coming from. And once we can identify and recognize where that opinion is coming from, then we tap into our godly soul, which is not self-interested, which is godly, and the godly soul will enable us to be that third judge to overcome the animalistic soul. And so this is the secret in life. Because when you're faced with dilemmas, with situations, you have to be honest with yourself. Where is my doubt coming from? Where does my self-interest lie? And I want to say one more thing. Sometimes you won't know the answer. Sometimes you need to ask someone else, and that's okay too. There's an element to that too, and that's okay. Everybody needs a mentor, someone who they can go to ask the very difficult questions. You also need good friends you can confide in. These are all ways of helping you in our life's decisions. We don't always have to come, or sometimes we can't see ourselves. Sometimes we ourselves are clouded. Our minds are clouded by our self-interest. Self-interest is very powerful. And that's really what we're discussing today, is that in these areas where there's a third judge needed, the Rabbi said also, sometimes you need to bring in another person into your decision-making. That all dovetail on what we're discussing here today. You have a godless animal soul that will go head-to-head. We're not sure who's going to win, sometimes because it's not clear who is who. Sometimes you need that third opinion, and sometimes to reach your godly soul, you need a mentor, as it says in the Mishnah. You need good friends, as it says in the Mishnah. We need all these things to help us make these right decisions in our life. And so I guess what I've been presenting today is that we have elements of our life that are very not clear. Okay, there are some elements of our life that are clear. There are a lot of elements of our life that are not clear. And coming to the truth is not easy, but it's the job that we have to do. And we have to figure out what is the truth, honesty. And to get to that honesty, we need to ask ourselves difficult questions, and sometimes we need to be vulnerable and ask other people. Okay, any questions or comments before I read the next little part? Again, going to be about honesty, but about the honesty of the Beinoni. Any questions or comments? What I've said till now. No? It's all clear. All clear as day. Okay, good. I hope so, at least. Okay. So now we're going to answer a technical question. Again, as you've seen, the Tanya is going to answer some technical questions because the Tanya is explaining very technical texts to present its opinion. But there's also what we learn from it. So the technical text here is a question we started off again in chapter 1. In chapter 1, we said that even if the whole world tells you you're a tzaddik, you should consider yourself like a wicked person. And the question was, how can I walk around thinking I'm wicked? It's not a nice thing. It's not a nice life. The Tanya is going to answer is that this statement is actually beautiful. The statement is saying like this: even if everybody tells you you're a tzaddik, why? Because you're a Beinoni and you never actually do any sins, and so nobody ever sees you sinning. So everybody thinks you're a tzaddik. You should look at yourself like you're a Rasha. It doesn't say look at yourself that you are wicked. Look at yourself like you are wicked. Why? Because we're talking about a Beinoni who never actually sins. So he's not actually wicked, but he's like he's wicked because just like a wicked person has two opinions in his mind, this Beinoni also has two opinions in their mind. Now you may ask me, Rabbi, beautiful, you just explained a Beinoni. The Beinoni should never think that they're a tzaddik, knowing that they are like a wicked person, and therefore they shouldn't, and this answers what we said earlier, you shouldn't be depressed. But Rabbi, how does that answer me? How can I walk around not depressed? How can I walk around me? I'm not a Beinoni. How can I walk around not depressed and sad about myself when I know that I do sin? I'll answer that question after we read this text. It's a good question. But let's first get the text, what it's telling us. And again, it's an important element of self-honesty. That's the other part I want to get from here. Is that the statement, the way that Tanya is reading it, is basically telling the Beinoni, you have to be self-honest with yourself. Even if everybody's telling you you're a tzaddik, you need to be honest with yourself. Who are you? And you should know, when the Tanya was written, there were a lot of people walking around thinking they were tzaddiks. Because they almost never sinned, or they never sinned in public, and people thought they were super righteous. They were tzaddiks. And they had a dose of self-honesty and understood where they stand in life or where they have to go. So, but let's read the text inside, and I'll get to the question at the end. How do we deal with ourselves that we do sin? How do we look at ourselves? She says, the above discussion about the default, unenlightened level of the Beinoni will now help us answer a question posed at the beginning of the Tanya. The Tanya had questioned the oath that, according to the Talmud, the soul is made to swear prenatally. Even if the entire world tells you you're a tzaddik, you should consider yourself like a wicked person. This was problematic, since it seemed to contradict the Mishnah's advice, don't consider yourself to be wicked. The Tanya will now offer an answer to this question through a close reading of the Talmud's words. The oath does not in fact state you must consider yourself an actual wicked person, Rasha. Rather, you should consider yourself like you're a Rasha. Who is like a Rasha? This term, the Tanya will argue, refers to a Beinoni. This is like this. But since the evil of the animal soul in the left chamber of the heart of the Beinoni's heart retains its innate strength and is still tempted to desire every worldly pleasure, right? We're talking about the Beinoni, the intermediate, right? The intermediate person still has a full animalistic soul. And its evil was not voided by dilution from overwhelming amount of good. The hallmark of a tzaddik, right? A tzaddik, his evil inclination is gone. And even its voice was not displaced permanently at all, only temporarily during prayer. We're setting the stage, telling you things you already know about a Beinoni, right? Basically, he has the voice of the evil inclination. Rather, its evil remains in full force, and it just lacks the control and dominions to spread influence over the body's parts. And even that is not due to its own merits, but because the holy, blessed, Holy One stands at the right hand of the poor man in the system and illuminating his divine heart, soul, what we just discussed a moment ago. Therefore, since the Beinoni's evil remains as strong as ever, he is referred to by the Talmud as Kirasha, like a wicked person. The Beinoni is like a Rasha because A, the evil and left chamber of the heart in the Beinoni retains its innate strength and has not been voided or displaced, which may result in negative thoughts popping into his head. And B, even the Beinoni's external self-mastery is essentially due to divine assistance, without which he would revert to a wicked person. So that's a dose of humility, by the way, over there as well. The Beinoni has to realize that even whatever he does is only with God's help. Important dose of humility. So it turns out the character of the Beinoni is predominantly like a Rasha, both inside and out. In other words, inside, he still has the animalistic soul. And he still has desires. The only thing is, he doesn't, I don't know why he adds the word out. It's his own word. I don't know where he got that word from. This explains the teaching of our sages of blessed memory cited in chapter 1. Even if the whole world tells you you are a tzaddik, you should consider yourself like a Rasha, like you're wicked. The sages were not suggesting that after achieving external mastery over the garments of thought, speech, and action, you ought to look at yourself as an actual wicked person, since this is simply not true and violates the Mishnah's advice, don't consider yourself to be a Rasha. Rather, what the sages meant to say is that the entire world tells you you are a tzaddik, you should consider yourself to be like a Rasha, meaning a Beinoni. So what's like a wicked person is a Beinoni, an intermediate person who is a mixture. People perceive only external behavior, not inner refinement, so they could not possibly know if you are a tzaddik or not, even if you don't know whether you've refined your inner soul, because its failure to surface doesn't mean it's not there. And this is such an important line, this next line, again, even if we're not Beinonis. Don't let what people tell you go to your head. Do not believe the world's opinion you are a tzaddik, as this would mean that the evil in you has been voided by the good and is very unlikely to be true, since this is the level of a tzaddik, a rare phenomenon. So again, it's so important. We in our lives, maybe our parents, maybe our colleagues, maybe our students, people tell us, our friends, people tell us things. Maybe they believe it about us. They say how good we are. Look, you never struggle. Look, you're so great. I wish I was like you. Don't let it go to your head. If it goes to your head, you'll stop fighting the good fight. You will become complacent. Tanya asks for self-honesty, no complacency. We need to know who we are. We need to be careful to know where we are standing. So even those of us who are not Beinoni, I would say there are parts of our life where we are more refined, parts of our life where we're less refined. And there's also the show we put onto the world. It's from the Talmud, it's clear. We all know the way we act in public is different than the way we act in private. And we all know our thoughts may be very different than our actions. And so the Talmud is the Mishnah is telling you, when the Mishnah says, look at yourself like a wicked, it's not to get you depressed. It's all about self-honesty, because self-honesty makes sure that we act the way we act. And so this is the first lesson we can have in our lives. Even those of us who are not a Beinoni, who may be wicked at times, we have to be self-honest about the places where we fail. And Tanya will tell us later, of course, we should never get depressed about that, because that's just another way to lose. But we do have to recognize, okay, so in a context of the Beinoni, which was a context which was important here to explain certain texts, the Beinoni cannot look at himself like a wicked person. We, number one, even if we look at ourselves like a wicked, it may be true, but shouldn't get depressed about it. There's other explanations that say, whatever, I'll get the other explanations, but just from a most basic standpoint, we have to recognize who we are, where our failings are, in order to know how to move forward. If I allowed people to annotate. If I allow if I allow people to, gotta turn that off. It's been a while. Okay, anyways, whatever. Okay, if we allow people to if we believe in ourselves too much, if we allow people to get their head too much, we may stop doing what we know to be true. Self-honesty, that's what this is about. We have to recognize where we are, who we are, know our failings, as I quoted from the Hayom Yom, from the Rebbe's daily teachings earlier, is that we have to be honest with ourselves in order to move on in our lives. Let's continue, because I want to get to the end of this piece here, which is right there. Okay. Rather, in your eyes, you should look at yourself as if the deep core of the evil remains with its full inborn strength in your heart's left chamber, and has not budged or departed from you whatsoever. If a Beinoni would look at himself as tzaddik, he would imagine that his battle with the evil is over, so he might lower his guard and relax to some extent. Therefore, the sage is stressed that a Beinoni is essentially like a Rasha, in whom the Yetzer Hara is as strong as ever in his heart. With such strong negative energy lurking below the surface, it would be a grave error for the Beinoni to relax his vigil for even a moment. And here's an important line. On the contrary, not only as your animal soul, you know what? The contrary part we'll get to next week, because it doesn't have to be connected. It's an important point that stands on its own feet that we can discuss next week. But I do want to answer the question, which is, so what about us? All right, so we understand that Beinoni is not supposed to look at himself as a wicked person. He can say he's like a wicked person, and that's his self-honesty. But we who are wicked, how do we deal with the fact that we are wicked? So first of all, you should know that Tanya doesn't really focus on this a lot, even for the Beinoni. It was just to prove its point from the text. But nevertheless, the question still remains. How do you answer the question? And I was looking today for an answer to the question, because at the end of the day, it is a problem, right? Because the Tanya quote earlier in chapter 1, it says, if you are in your eyes wicked, you'll be sad about that. How do we deal with that? So I saw the Rabbi wrote in one talk, there were different things. I didn't have enough time to look everything up. I saw the Rabbi wrote in one place is that we have to believe in God's forgiveness. We have to serve God with joy. And when we're doing the right thing, believe in God's forgiveness and know that whatever I've done, God forgives me. And the Rebbe in other talks proved the points. We pray 3 times a day. And we turn to God in our prayers and Amida prayers, and we tell God, Slach lanu avinu ki chatanu. Forgive us, O God, for we have sinned. If we don't believe God to be forgiving, we are saying the blessing in vain. If we don't believe God to be a forgiving God, we could not be able to say that blessing 3 times a day. We would be saying a blessing in vain. We have to have a belief that we try our best, but we need to serve God with joy and the recognition that God forgives. God forgives. God forgives us. We keep working on ourselves. We need to be honest with ourselves where we are. But in every single moment, to believe that God is a forgiving God. He's a merciful God. You know, how do we show up every Yom Kippur? Think about it. You show up every Yom Kippur, and you know you're going to sin again the next year, but we believe that even though God in the Torah gives us a very tall order, God is also very understanding. I think it would be foolish for us to believe that God thinks we'd never sin. I just think would be silly. Do women also have to say it 3 times? No, they don't have to say it 3 times because they don't sin as much. Okay, I'm kidding. Exactly how many times a day women have to say the prayer? It's a technical obligation. The point remains, nevertheless, that God is a forgiving God. Trust me, if God forgives the men, He forgives the women too. Okay. If you want to get there's prayer books for women specifically. If you want, there's shortened versions. You know what? The discussion of women and prayer is beyond the scope of this discussion. But women do have to pray every day. Exactly how much? It's way beyond here. Is another way of saying I don't really know. Ask my wife. Okay. But they definitely say it at least once a day, to my understanding, that God should forgive. And so even once a day, how can you come to God, say the blessing, God's name, that God should forgive you? And the answer is because we believe that God is a forgiving God. And sadness, what's the sadness of being wicked? Is that we look down at ourselves. And that's why I think it's so important to understand that God being I say, yeah, no worries. That's why it's so important to understand God being a forgiving God is understanding that God is understanding of us. I think the sadness comes from feeling like we've sinned, we've done wrong, and God will not forgive us and look at us negatively. Because otherwise, what's wrong with sinning? It's our relationship with God that bothers us, right? I mean, if you didn't care about the relationship with God, who cares about sinning, right? It's the relationship with God. And so we have to understand, this is my understanding of what I was reading. I need to read it again. Maybe I'll discuss it more next week because I have more time to read again. There were a lot of interesting things in this chapter to really figure out. So it took me a long time to prepare this. But that's kind of, my basic understanding is this, that God is an understanding God. And he understands this relationship, and He wants us to be happy, and He is forgiving. And we should not, sadness, as we'll learn later in the Tanya, is a element that can be used in forgiveness in certain circumstances, but God does not want us to do it all the time. So in short, if your sadness, let's go back to what we said earlier. Going back to what we said earlier, right? The battle that goes on in our mind. Your animal soul will want you to be sad. Your animal soul will want you to be sad because it'll know it'll get you to sin more. And maybe but that's coming from your animal soul, self-interest. God's interest is that you become better every single day. And so when you have in your mind, one part of your mind says, let's be sad about who I am. Another part of the mind says, let's be happy. God is an understanding God. God is a forgiving God. Let me do the best that I can do today. That's coming from the godly soul. It's not about self-interest. It's about what God wants. The self-interest says, let me focus on myself. And the godly soul says, let me focus on my mission. When you focus on your mission, God forgives. God's a forgiving God. God's an understanding God. And there's nothing to be depressed about. We have moments to use sadness, to obtain forgiveness, moments of tshuva, settled times of the day, but on a whole, we have to serve God with joy. I know I'm leaving you a little bit on a cliffhanger. Maybe we'll have to pick it up again next week. I'll have to do more research on it, but that is where I have to stop the recording today.